I started my academic journey when I was doing my postgraduate studies at Peking University in Beijing, China. So during that time, I was involved in a research project in that university, aiming to do some research on the urban periphery of Beijing. But it turned out a sea change of the landscape in that area was unfolding at that time. So I was really curious about this change. I want to know why this happened in such a significant way. What's the underlying mechanism? Basically, that's my starting point. So afterwards, I decided to continue my research with the PhD journey. I went to the LSE in London to do my PhD, and I chose exactly this topic for my PhD thesis, which I finished in 2017. Yeah. Afterwards, I went back to China. I started my job as an assistant professor at Durham University of China in 2018. And I worked there until 2024 when I came here to Durham. Basically, that's my trajectory so far. In terms of my research concerns or themes, I think two keywords can be used. One is urban periphery, another is the state. As you can tell, you can see from the beginning point, the starting point of my research in more than 15 years ago now. I have always been concerned about how the urban periphery has been transformed in the urbanization process, and what's the role of the state in shaping or reshaping such process and such landscapes. These are the two keywords in my research. Talking about the challenges I have been encountering during my research, I think one of the most important points I want to emphasize is about the gap between what I observed and the mainstream theories or concepts that have been popular in the discipline. Basically, this means for many of the theories or concepts, as we know, they were often originated from the global north, so they are not paying that much attention to what I'm looking into, like the urban process in Beijing or other cities in the global south. So I have always been struggling a little bit since my PhD to think about how to engage with both the theoretical frameworks or theoretical trajectories that have been popular, have been influential, and on the other hand, the empirical variations or differences that cannot be just put into those theoretical frameworks directly. This is one of the biggest challenges, and I have tried in many different ways to address this. I'm really interested in understanding the changing or evolving urban fabrics, the urban landscapes at the frontier. Partly because of my own personal history, I was born in a town which was developing quite quickly when I was a child. So I was really amazed by this change. So I want to know more about how this urban space is becoming what it is. This focus on the becoming is what I'm really concerned about, the becoming of urban fabrics. And another thing is about the political dynamics or mechanisms, because especially in countries like China, the state is really playing a very critical, pivotal role in shaping such urban process, in conditioning or limiting the social and spatial change. And I want to understand better how this happened in such a way and what kind of theoretical lessons we can learn from this. And by doing such analysis, hopefully we can figure out some alternative patterns where other political agencies can also be incorporated into the shaping of this urban process. Hopefully, in so doing, we can achieve, the so-called right to the city or social and spatial justice. This is the ultimate concern of all of my research. In my research so far, I have been just developing my own research around the two keywords I mentioned, urban periphery and the state. Talking about the urban periphery, one of the most important pieces of work, in my own view, is the one I just mentioned about the language issue, the names of urban periphery. Because it's not just about a descriptive account of the linguistic connotations of a name of a place. It's more about how we can try to theorize from such different names, and in so doing to try to enrich the urban vocabularies together globally. So it's important because, in my view, it's not just an empirical work, it's with epistemological significance. This is one of the work I want to highlight here. So the second line of inquiry related to the state question, it's about, as I just said, it's about the political dynamics and mechanisms of the state, or between the state and non-state actors in the changing urban landscapes, urban fabrics. Talking about this, I have been doing some research for example, on the performativity of the state, which means I'm trying to look into certain discourses produced by the state in advancing their own urban agenda. And in so doing, it's not just about a discourse analysis of those terms or political words, sentences. It's more about how the state is actually adapting itself, rebuilding up itself through this discursive mechanism. Another work related to this state inquiry is about the very dialectical relationship between the state and informality. Because normally in the literature we often intend, though there are some reflections on this, but there is a tendency to isolate the state and the urban informality, seeing them as like two separate arenas. But when we are looking into the Chinese urban conditions, we realize that even though the state is always playing a critical role, the way it's manifesting itself could often be informal. So the state and informality, they are co-constitutive of each other, rather than being separated. Based on such works on the state, I think if I'm going to summarize the theme of this second line of my research, it could be a revitalization of the so-called official urbanism invented by Henri Lefebvre, a French philosopher. I'm just taking use of like performativity, informality, and so on, these kind of analytical lenses, to try to understand what's the new version of this official urbanism that's now unfolding in Chinese urban spaces and urban life, and what kind of theoretical potentials we can further generate from this recognition of the official urbanism. I have been working on a new project after my PhD, mainly focusing on the development of infrastructures in Beijing, including in the area which I have been focusing on, the urban periphery, but also including other parts of the city, especially in the central area. The reason why I'm concerned about infrastructures is because we often talk about how infrastructure development can advance the social well-being of the whole population. But it seems like in the case of Beijing, the development of infrastructures, those kind of technological advancing, has been articulated with kind of exclusiveness. So the development of new infrastructures, they are only targeting a certain selection of population, not other groups in the city. And often, if we are going to look into such cases, we will see the building up of such infrastructures is often at the cost of the displacement of some of the disadvantaged groups. So I just want to understand this mechanism better, how infrastructures have been made in a very, on the one hand, impressive way, on the other hand, exclusive way. This impressive exclusiveness articulation is what I'm looking into at the moment. In my research so far, I have been very keen in trying to figure out some alternative ways of doing theories, of theorization. It's about China, but it's not China specific. So I'm always trying very hard to bring such Chinese urban experiences into dialogues with broader discussions. As I have just mentioned, one of the tasks or efforts I have been developing so far is regarding the linguistic, language and name dynamics of the urban peripheries. This is just one way. I'm also trying to figure out some alternative ways of seeing the state. I have engaged with the performativity issue, the informality issue. I'm also developing some other lines of inquiry for that infrastructure project. All of them could be taken as the endeavor to theorize elsewhere in alternative ways. And as I also just mentioned, I'm really keen in take China as methods. When we are going to follow this approach, it's not just about recognize the empirical differences in China, but also about how we can learn the alternative ways or Chinese ways of seeing and doing things, and then make reflections from that point of view. So yeah, this is hopefully one of the ways we can bring other voices or alterity of other urban experiences into our own arena, into the focus of our discussion. I have always been concerned about how my research can be meaningful for people beyond the academia as well. When I went back to China, I think I always kept that in my mind, which said I should be one of the ambassadors of critical urban studies to illuminate many more researchers who are concerned about the urban change in China. I have been taking use of my lectures, my discussions with students, to let my students know that there are many other ways, alternative ways, of understanding China's urban change, which are not always the same as the official discourse. In addition to this kind of critical thinking and critical theoretical discussion in my lectures, I have also been managing to develop a public writing platform based on my research and many other research in critical urban studies. This platform is called Urban Sense. It's being involved with a group of early career researchers who are sharing the same mission with me, and we have been publishing more than 200 posts since its foundation in 2020. With these more than 200 essays, reading notes, book reviews, and a lot of other products, we have always been working very hard to foreground a lot of the alternative or otherwise views for understanding the urban change in China, or critically. And we have been attracting so far more than 10,000 subscribers, which is, I think, quite impressive. So this is one of the impacts, I think, together with the colleagues in Urban Sense, we have been managing to achieve. Talking about my own research, I also think my research has been discussed by colleagues in this area, in this discipline. For example, my discussion on the names or linguistic dynamics of the urban change has been foregrounded in some recent discussions on the urban-rural relationship, on the different vocabularies or different theorizations of the urban periphery, on the different or alternative ways of understanding, being, and becoming the urban. So I think this is another thing that I can highlight here as kind of the impact of my research. So far, my research has been focusing on Beijing in general. So next step for my research, I think, is to move beyond Beijing. I have been discussing this issue with a lot of colleagues. When I was doing my PhD, for example, many of my colleagues who are familiar with China would always question me that your understanding of this urban mechanism is quite particular to Beijing. It's not always this case in other cities in China. And I accept this criticism. I have been developing, together with some other colleagues, I have been developing this new collective called Overlooked Cities Collective. And we are really keen in understanding those overlooked cities, overlooked urban fabrics, overlooked urban conditions and experiences, which are not often foregrounded in the literature. So inspired by this collective, by my colleagues who have been devoting a lot of time to develop this collective, I think now it's my turn to shift my own focus from Beijing, very heavily looked at city, to some overlooked parts of China. I'm still now in the early stage of designing my next project, but this will be one of the key concerns in selecting my field sites. I want to just do some more research on those overlooked part of China, overlooked urban conditions in China, to see if I can get some alternative views or inspirations of new theorization possibilities. Another theme that I think will shed light on my next project is to continue and extend my discussion on language and the city. I have been writing about this a little bit, but I think a lot more needs to be done. There are so many different layers, dimensions, manifestations of the linguistic mechanism that has been associated with urban change. I want to read more, learn more, and research more about such mechanisms and their manifestations on languages, the city, politics, the state, and so on and so forth. This is in general my imagination of my next project. I have been in Durham for more than 1 year now, and I really find it a great place to do the research I want to do, and also a great place to educate our students together. Here, the most important thing I want to highlight is the great intellectual atmosphere. In this department, we have several research clusters. The two of them that I have been associated with are Urban Worlds Cluster and Politics, State, and Space Cluster. Both of the clusters have organized plenty of great events discussing colleagues' works in progress inviting guest speakers. And through such collective discussions, I have been exposed to plenty of new ideas, new insights, new perspectives that can be fed up into my own research later. In addition to such cluster-oriented, like formal events activities, we also have a lot of opportunities to have informal discussion. I have been involved in a lot of like writing groups, and regular discussions on grant ideas, and so on and so forth. And now I can be in a better position to understand how the reviewers will look at my work, including my draft papers, including my grant proposals. All of such insights were collected from such informal discussions. Another great thing I find here in our department is about the very rigorous arrangement of the education activities. Because I'm now comparing our department with many other departments in the UK and beyond, I realize we do give the students priority in the whole departmental organization and operation. For example, one of the maybe most impressive moments across the whole education line is the first year, the level 1 students group discussion in their very first few months with the supervisors on how to read a journal article, how to write in a meaningful way, how to reference properly, those kind of things. This kind of small group discussion with supervisors, it will of course cost some time for colleagues here, but it's really helpful for our students to get familiar with the university education with independent research capacities as quickly as possible. And this is quite innovative in a sense, I would say. It's not because other universities cannot do this, but just because we would like to invest in such endeavors with our time, with our resources to help our students. This is another thing I think I want to highlight when we are talking about the whole intellectual atmosphere of Durham geography.